The 1992 Los Angeles Uprising, the Cambodian genocide, Japanese American incarceration. What you know isn't always the full story. Our new podcast, Inheriting, about Asian American and Pacific Islander families where the past is personal.
Korean Americans, we call it 사이구.
Did you ever realize when you were a child that you became an orphan?
Camp was such a hard time. How do you think you got through it?
Listen to Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR network, wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And hey, welcome to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And we are here for our discussion of our September book club pick, A Burning by Megha Majumdar. And this episode marks the beginning of our 9th year of Books and Boba. This past weekend of September 28th was our 8th anniversary. Rira, congratulations. We made it into another year.
Yes, congratulations. I cannot believe it's been 8 years since we started doing this. We've covered so many books. In my head, I was just like, will we run out of books to talk about? I mean, I knew that wasn't going to be the case, but it was just like when we first started, it was like when, We Need Diverse Books kind of got kickstarted. They just started in like 2015. So I was like, okay, we're on trend now. How are we going to be in the next couple of years? And it's been great to see Asian American and Asian diasporan authors not only make it to the New York Times bestsellers list, but also be making their way into like other like more commercial genres. So it's been great.
Yeah, it's been really cool to see. Like when we first started, everyone was like, oh, you should read Crazy Rich Asians, Joy Luck Club. Like we got those recommendations more than any other books. And I feel like now there are so many more books now to choose from or that people have in mind when they think of books by Asian authors that I think it's a good sign. We're not there yet, right? We're still a very small piece of the American literature canon. But it's just really cool to see, especially authors that we've read before or that we've covered or we've talked to, go on to write their second, third, even fourth books, and just to see the community grow. So super happy that we've been able to be a small part of that over the last 8 years and looking forward to playing a bigger part in the future as well. So thank you to everyone who's been with us throughout the journey. No matter when you joined us, we're glad to have you around. And I guess on that note, Books and Boba is, as always, supported in part by our listeners. So if you'd like to become a bigger part of our book club, you can head on over to patreon.com/booksandboba and join our Patreon. Our book club members gain access to our members-only Discord server where you can talk to us about our book club picks and other topics in real time, as well as our monthly bonus podcast, Boba Chats. And we'll have a really great discussion for our 8th anniversary edition sometime next week, probably. So yeah, thanks to everyone who's become a part of our Patreon community so far, and we hope to see more of you there in the future. With that said, man, Rira, this month's book was definitely a heavier read, right? Like
can't be sunshine and rainbows and cozy times all the time here at Books and Boba. The reason why people have listened to us for so long is because of our diversity in our reading choices. So, this was a very different read from our last book club pick, which actually, no, that was a little bit dystopian. So it was kind of like a bummer read too.
I mean, at least that book had like a kind of a hopeful resolution. And not to get too far into our discussion, because we're definitely going to have a lot to discuss on this book club pick. But yeah, it's definitely been a while since we've read such a heavy book. And it was really interesting to read this alongside our book club members on Discord too, because we were all just bracing ourselves for that ending. But before we get into the book proper, just a quick spoiler warning. We will be discussing A Burning in its entirety, which includes the entirety of the plot. So if you have not finished the book yet, this is your cue to push pause on this podcast and go finish the book and then come back and listen to our thoughts. We'll be here waiting for you.
Yeah. And for those of you who have not read the book, just content warnings for this conversation and for reading the book. There is content warning for transphobia, police brutality, corruption in the judicial system, and mentions of rape. So if any of those are triggering to you, just proceed with caution.
Yeah, so I guess let's get started, as always, with the book jacket description.
Jivan is a Muslim girl from the slums, determined to move up in life, who is accused of executing a terrorist attack on a train because of a careless comment on Facebook. P.T. Sir is an opportunistic gym teacher who hitches his aspirations to a right-wing political party and finds that his own ascent becomes linked to Jivan's fall. Lovely, an irresistible outcast whose exuberant voice and dreams of glory fill the novel with warmth and hope and humor, has the alibi that can set Jivan free. But it will cost her everything she holds dear. So this book came out in 2020 or 2021. So it happened. So this book was pretty much released during the Black Lives Matters protest, during the murder of George Floyd, and also kind of the increase in the Hindu nationalist government and a lot of the rising attacks against Muslims in India.
Yeah, and that really made this story interesting to read, especially from an American perspective, right? Because, this story does take place in India, in Calcutta, and is a response to the rise of, like you mentioned, Hindu nationalism in India, which also corresponded with the rise of far-right nationalist groups in politics all around the world. And so it was an interesting exercise to read a political, social story that isn't centered on American politics and American narratives, even though we can still map our own struggles with far-right populist movements with what the characters in this story go through.
Yeah, definitely true. I think Megha is the fact that she was born and raised in Kolkata and she immigrated to the States to attend college at Harvard. And her experiencing two different worlds where a lot of the political corruption kind of run parallel to each other. I think that's why it was resonating with American readers and also Indian readers who, actually live in that environment. So who is this book written for? I think it's literally just written for anyone because wherever you live, there is going to be injustice. There is going to be corruption. And this book a lot of it is about how marginalized groups are incentivized to fight amongst themselves. And, it's about individuals who wish to thrive and have a better life under a corrupt system. But in order to do that, they have to adapt corruptive measures.
Yeah, I did some supplemental reading into the inspirations for the novel, and the far-right movement that's depicted in Megha's story is inspired by the real-life, like you mentioned, Hindu nationalist movement that has come into power in India. And much like other populist nationalist movements around the world, right, they came to power by playing on the economic and social insecurities of the working class, right? People who feel like they've been forgotten by their state. And part of the promise that these parties, these movements give them is if they come into power, then everyone will have a chance to improve their lives, right? Social mobility is a big part of their message. And, what they promise is to remove all obstacles to that social mobility, which often translates to removing immigrants and other undesirables who are in the way of true citizens. There's a reason why there's always a xenophobic tinge to a lot of these parties' rhetorics, right? And in a way, that social mobility is a central theme for this book, right? All three of our main characters, Lovely, P.T. Sir, Jivan, they all dream of a better life. P.T. Sir wants to feel important, right? Lovely wants to become a famous actress. And Jivan just wants, she has the most humble dream of all, right? She just wants her family to be middle class. She wants to live in a state of not having to worry about money, shelter, medicine, healthcare. And, the sad part is not to get ahead of ourselves, but in a way, two of the three characters do achieve that mobility. They start on their way to achieving their dreams, but they do so at the expense of Jivan. And the title of this novel is A Burning. And if you think about what's being burned, essentially Jivan and her dreams are being burned. They're being used as kindling to fuel the dreams of these two other characters.
Yeah. And I also read that Jivan, I didn't listen to the audiobook, so I don't actually know the correct pronunciations. So sorry for our listeners out there. Jivan means life in Hindu. And I was like, oh, that's really, I don't like, I wouldn't say ironic, but it was just like, okay, yeah, it's like this character is young and full of life. Like, even though she was born poor, born under the quote unquote wrong religion, born under just like so many, like there's so many things working against her, but she still dreams of this middle class life. And it's like, yeah, this is someone who is full of life. And it's just sad to see what she goes through after she just posts something on Facebook. And that was really terrifying because as someone who is very vocal on social media about like injustices and just like social movements, I was just like, yeah, we joke about like the FBI, just each of us having an FBI agent monitoring us at all times to make sure that, you know, we're not terrorists or whatever. But this literally just happened to her. She just wrote like an innocuous post complaining about the government, and then she just gets arrested. And it's like, wow, she can't even do that. Writing a post on Facebook and criticizing the government, that is a privilege that we have as Americans. And that really made me, I don't know, it just like unsettled me.
Yeah, I mean, the way that Megha depicts how social media is used in India and how it's kind of the main source for news for a lot of people, like the way that communication technology has like spread and has outpaced the rate of like, I guess, like what we would call media literacy in America, right? Like, you know, I think we see this a lot in our like own like Asian whisper networks, like WeChat and Kakao, I guess, for Koreans, where it's like, yeah, a lot of times our like the biggest vector for like conspiracy theories for like people our parents' age is these social media groups, right? Because everyone can speak with such confidence and authority that like, yeah, it sounds convincing enough, right? And that's something that we learn in real life as well as in this book, is if someone sounds convincing enough, people will take it at face value as the truth. And that's frightening too, right?
Yeah, yeah. And we'll get into it later, but it just like plays into journalism as well, and ethics, and what happens when you're living in a government that is kind of preventing freedom of speech, because you're also incentivizing people to sensationalize stories in order to keep their jobs. So that's another thing that we will talk about later on when we get to that plot point.
Yeah, like reading along with the group on Discord, it was interesting. It was like to see our hope for a happy ending diminish as we get further along, and like realizing that like this isn't a book about a young woman overcoming injustice, right? This is about a young woman basically getting buried by a rigged system. And I think in a sense, it has more in common with like the works of Steinbeck and like Vonnegut, right? Like it's not a story about like a plucky youth overcoming obstacles. It's about like, hey, things are fucked up, and this is how a fucked up system can affect you as like a normal person.
Yeah, I think this book was really marketed at the time as a literary thriller, and I think that is a misnomer, because this is definitely a social novel. This is definitely like our modern day Les Miserables in a way. And it's like a modern day Dickens tale too. So yeah, like the thriller part, I mean, this book starts with a bang. It starts with a train getting on fire, and then our main character being immediately arrested without any justification. So it's like, yeah, we're like, it starts with a bang, and then everything else is kind of like this simmering pot of, I guess, like anxiety.
Not just anxiety, but like, you know, you keep having hope because obviously
that's
Jivan
funny because I did
it.
not have hope.
Well, you know,
all.
Obviously Jivan didn't do it, and obviously she's innocent. But like all the people who had a chance to help her, all the people who had the opportunity to speak the truth, chose not to in service of their own purposes, right? Not just P.T. Sir and Lovely, but also, yeah, the journalists, the political leaders, even like the lawyers, right? Her lawyers, they all choose to look the other way because of like what they can gain from it versus what they could lose.
Yeah, and we see this in like everyday life, you know? Like there was like a scene where Lovely is trying to get into this mall and the guards there, they're like, oh, you have to pay me like 100 rupees to get in. And she's like, what the fuck? Like, you just let the person in front of me walk through without paying anything. And he goes like, well, I don't make up the rules. And it's like, you just made up the rules right now. So it's literally, I think there was a character in the interlude. It was the political leader's like aide assistant whose side hustle is to be a broker and to like sell these swamplands to refugees. And he's like, it's a riot economy. Like, I'm just a broker. Like, this is just how it is. And
essentially
I'm like,
creating the disgruntled working class that will become, again, kindling for his party's rise to power, right? Like, I think, this book there's no direct reference to this is capitalism, but it does reflect like how capitalist systems cause people to see each other not as people, but how they can be used and how they can extract value from them, right? Like in the end, everyone in this book is used. Like not only Jimin, but also Lovely and PT Sir are all being used, right? Like Lovely eventually does. Like, so Lovely is a
Hydra.
Yeah, it's a Hydra who is kind of I think it's more of a blanket term for someone who doesn't subscribe to like generic gender roles. So you could be trans, eunuchs, cross-dressers. Like it's like a general like underclass of people who also has like a mystic connotation, right? And they dream of becoming an actress. And in the end, like they get their dream, but it's like, yes, they're on like movies and TV shows and stuff, but like the roles they're playing, they're still very marginalized, but they can't see that they're being used still. And like PT Sir becomes like the spokesperson for this far right party, but he's still like a low level party man who could very easily also be used as kindling at some point, right? So like everyone's being used, and like Lovely and PT Sir, even though they quote unquote win at the end, aren't safe neither, right? Because they're still subordinate to people with even more power.
Yeah. And PT Sir really reminded me of some like white cis men in this country who, they are dissatisfied with their life and they believe that women have freaking ruined their lives for them, ruined their futures for them. So they join these red pill communities where it's like, let's it's like we are entitled to having this, that, and what, and it's the women's fault for being independent and for turning away from traditional marriages. And it's just like, like PT Sir is one of those guys who is, he is earnest and he feels like an outsider at the school that is like an all-girl school. And he's, I don't know, I guess he feels like emasculated and like not important. And then like going to this rally where he gets free food and like just being close to powerful people. He's like, I want to be powerful. I want to be in the room where it happens. And that's just his that's just like the beginning of his tumble through the red pill tunnel. Like I just kind of dubbed it while I was reading the book.
I thought it was interesting that PT Service is also like, I think the only person here who goes by like their true name
title
is Jivan, right? Like PT Sir that's not even his name. That's just he's a PE teacher. So physical training sir, right? I like that he was like, from the start, he's not like, he does have an underdog story, but he's not set up as someone you root for. Like even from the start, from the jump, he is someone who gives at least modern readers the ick, right? Like this guy begins with complaining about why is his wife saddling him with the job of getting mangoes? Can't she get the mangoes? Isn't she the wife?
It was tomatoes, but same thing. Yeah.
And then talking about like how he knows Jivan from her days as like a student and how he like saw her talent for athletics, but then all of a sudden she left without telling, and then feeling personally aggrieved that she never said thank you.
Yeah, like personally aggrieved that she didn't say thank you, and she didn't like leave without any like explanation. So he comes up with the explanation being like, oh, like she just gave up because she's lazy, or she just gave up school because she doesn't care about her future, when in reality she is in poverty and she wanted to just get past grade 10 so that she could get like a job at a retail store. And to him, it just, he kind of just made up this narrative that kind of made him feel more powerful. And I don't know, like you said, like he gave you the ick. And to be perfectly honest, this entire book gave me the ick. Like it was just like dripping in slick self-justification. It just felt like very oily for me to read. And I'm just like, none of you guys are shit. Like none of you guys are good people. But, at the same time, I can't blame you because the system is working against you. But at the same time, like the self-justification for like them, throwing away, like trading their morals for personal gain. I'm just like, if you can just be honest about it, just be like, yeah, I'm here to get ahead in life. And, it sucks, but like, this is how it is. But everybody is trying to like craft this underdog story where I'm just like, come on.
I feel like that's kind of the only way these people can live with themselves, right?
Live,
like even so, like, the middle part of PT Sir's story is he becomes like the way he works his way up the party is he kind of becomes their go-to witness to convict enemies of the party, right? Essentially, that's why like they never specifically say who these people are that he is giving false testimony to. But the fact that is like he is there to justify the judges they've already paid off to convict these people who are either convenient, again, kindling like Jivan is, or they're political enemies, right? And the fact that he just like goes along with it and also justifies, oh, these people must be bad if they're asking me to lie about it. Because he's like, I don't even know if he's a true believer, right? Because he does have a slight moral, like he does feel bad about it, but not enough not to do it, right?
Yeah, I feel like he lies to himself because the political leader of the party, she says like, oh, it's because, these cases, they're like 90% of the way there into, convictions, but we just need like one more thing to put these criminals behind bars. And, you're the one who's pretty much the last nail on the coffin. Like everything is already like written on the wall. And it's just like, do you really believe that every single person that you are testifying against is guilty? He knows that is not true, or at least like it gets to a point where he is at a trial where Lovely's ex-lover is accused of selling counterfeit goods, and he's just like, oh, this guy looks innocent. This guy looks very like genuinely confused on why he is here in court, but he kind of brushes it off afterward, being like, what can I do? You know? He was going to go to jail anyway. And I'm like, I mean, you're right. He was going to go to jail anyway, but did you have to testify against him? You didn't.
But this way he gets benefit. Again, like this is how he gets value.
He gets money.
Benefits from it, right? And it's just funny because whether or not he realizes this, the party can do this to him at any time too. Like he knows where the bodies are buried. As an operator, if he's ever deemed a threat to the party, someone else could put him in jail too by doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
What did you think about his relationship with his wife and how his wife kind of, towards the end, do you feel like she kind of buys into like, oh, like pushing him to like, don't think too much about your morals, right? Like, oh, look at all the great things we're getting because of what you're doing for the party.
I mean, in the beginning, she was just like, hey, stay away from these political rallies. They use and burn people. And it's dangerous to be just close to power because you never know what's going to happen. And, I mean, she was right about that, but he was going to these rallies anyway, with or without her permission. So it was just like, I think halfway in, she just realized that there was nothing she can do to change her husband's mind. And then like the benefits started coming in, and she's like, well, if I can't change his mind, like, why bother like fighting against it? In fact, like we're getting benefits from it.
Yeah, we're going shopping at electronic stores. Yeah. There was a point in PT Sir's story where he had the chance to kind of self-reflect, right? And that was when, so eventually he starts getting more responsibilities from the party in addition to his, his court assignments, and starts being sent to conduct rallies in rural villages as the party's, educational surrogate, promising better education and better funded schools and things like that. And at one of his rallies, things get out of hand, which results in the death of like a Muslim family from the community.
Yeah. Like what happened was at the rally, someone had asked PT Sir, like, "Oh, well, are you going to let Muslims into the schools?" And he's like, "Well, like India is a quote unquote secular state, so we are supposed to respect everybody's religion." And then someone in the back is like, "Fuck the Muslims. They like there's a family that just killed a cow," and it was just like, okay. These people have just been waiting for any avenue to get rid of this family. And I was really appalled by reading the interlude where you're reading from the villagers' like POV. And it was just like really devastating to read. And like it reminded me of this wasn't in India, but this was in Afghanistan. This was back in 2015. There was a 27-year-old woman who was brutally lynched by a mob. And it was because someone had falsely claimed that she burned the Quran. And like her murder like led to no arrests. And I'm just like, yeah, like mob mentality is truly horrifying. And it was like I didn't really have any hopeful, I don't know, like in my head I was just like, oh, like this book is not going to end well. Like Jivan is definitely the sacrificial lamb on the altar, because it becomes more than just the quote unquote crime that she committed. It's like, oh yeah, she's a Muslim. So
not just that, but she also represents law and order, right? The reason that the party leader pushes PT Sir to push the lawyer to bury the mercy
petition.
The mercy petition, which, moving forward a little bit, like she gets convicted for her crime and sentenced to death. And she has one last chance for clemency, and that's a mercy petition, which angers a lot of the online right-wing supporters of PT Sir's party. And the reason why he's pushed to do that is because the party needs to assert that it can provide law and order for its citizens, because that's what they promised. And I think it was really like reading this at the same time, like the Marcellus Williams stuff was happening in.
I was just about to say,
was like, here's a case in our world where like a man who has tons of reasonable doubt whether or not he is guilty of the crime that got him the death sentence, enough for the prosecutors of the case and the family of the victim to petition for him to not be executed, is executed anyways, because like one can, like there's no real, like no one has given like an official reason, but one can assume it's just because the judicial system wants to assert its power, right? It wants to like cannot show weakness, and so must like double down on its decisions.
Yeah. And also it's like a terrible way of thinking about people as just like monetary value. It's just like, oh, if we keep Marcellus alive, then we just have to keep, like, that is just extra money that we have to spend in our prison system. And it's like, that's a terrible way to think about human lives.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like both in the book and in real life, like the state doesn't see Marcellus or Jivan, people like them, as full people, right? With people with context. And we see this also in the middle of the book when Jivan was talking to the reporter, right? Like there's a reporter that was the first to find her home and was like very sympathetic, right? And so she thought, okay, here's a sympathetic reporter. If I talk to him, tell him my story, people will see that I'm innocent. There's no way I could have done this. And Megha does a really slick and kind of mean thing. And like, this is the middle of the book where like, there's still hope that this is a story about Jivan overcoming her circumstances, right? Because by all accounts, this guy seems to be an up and up dude. And then I think the moment that we all got crushed was when he finally releases his article, and it's kind of a slam piece on her. And we're not given context on what happened, right? Is this an editor who took the piece and like rewrote it with a different perspective, or was this his intention all along?
Yeah. There's something like truly heartbreaking and just terrible about Jivan, who is like this teenager, essentially, like telling her story, telling this stranger pretty much like, hey, like we were kicked out of our own homes and my father was incapacitated to work. And this is kind of like how I ended up here. Is it a crime for me to be Muslim? Is it a crime for me to be poor? Should I have continued to go to school? If I had not tutored Lovely in English, would I not be here? Like all of these vulnerabilities she is like telling this reporter whose job is to tell the truth. It's to report on the truth, and he betrays that duty. And I have no doubt that he knew what his editor was going to do. As a writer, you know what your publication is aiming for in terms of tone. So it was the greatest betrayal in my opinion, because like you said, this was the last sliver of hope that Jivan's voice gets heard, and it's completely misconstrued. And she's not even allowed to testify at her own hearing because her lawyer says 99% of the time it just gets worse for the defendant if they testify. And it's like, well, she had hoped that having this journalist speak for her and share her personal struggles was going to make a difference. And it didn't. It was the ultimate betrayal of trust, in my opinion.
Yeah. And, no doubt that this was a huge scoop for that reporter, right? Like everyone was trying to get a story with her. And the fact that she reached out to him by name. And in a sense, like, I'm with you. He probably knew what he was going to write, what this story was going to be, because there was no way, again, because of the way that her story, her case has been politicized and essentially instrumentalized as like a political tool. There was no way he would have ever been able to print a sympathetic article and came out unscathed, right? So in a sense, like you can see him also giving the PT Sir excuse of, well, there's nothing I could do. And like the only possible outcome is to use this to his advantage, right? And like write a article that will sell papers for his editor. And that's also really sad. On, I guess, a less depressing note, when Jivan was recounting the story of how her family, how her home was destroyed in a police raid, it did trigger for me a memory of a film I watched earlier this year. Have you seen the Dev Patel film Monkey Man yet?
Yeah, I have. I remember Discord being like, oh man, I love that movie. And it really did provide a lot of context for me on like the setting and what the Hijra community is like, what Lovely must have looked like. Yeah. So, that film depicts the survivor of a state crackdown on a minority village, essentially for its land, which is a similar story of what happened to Jivan's family. And the movie also depicts a far-right movement led by a corrupt spiritual leader. Like you mentioned, a group of Hijras are also involved. So watching that film earlier this year equipped me with the ability to visualize a lot of the things that happened in this book. And I think it's not a one-on-one story, but it's definitely a decent companion piece for people who want to kind of get a different perspective. Like, I do think it would have been nice if Jivan had the same story as Dev Patel's character, because he ends up going off on like a John Wick revenge quest and like is able to get his revenge on his oppressors. Jivan, unfortunately, has a more realistic ending of what happens when you get targeted by the state. Yeah. I mean, strangely enough, since we're bringing up Monkey Man and like movies, I thought like I was reminded by Kurosawa and Rashomon because we're playing with 3 different POVs and like each one is kind of like self-justifying their part in the rape and murder in that movie, and also just like how the story is being told in flashbacks and just like how each character like represents like the victim, the witness, and like the jury. So I was just like, oh, this is very, like, this seems very familiar. And I don't know, like it makes sense to me that Megha like said in an interview how this book came out in like 2020. So she was like, she was talking about how like everybody was in lockdown and she was kind of competing with television because everybody is just like binge watching shows. And it's like, yeah, like, how do I keep up that intensity in my pacing of the book? And I was like, yeah, I can kind of see the TV structure in the book. So I thought that was interesting from like a craft perspective.
So we talked a lot about Jivan's story, which is the central spine that the book follows, and like P.T. Sir and his rise in power. The third character, Lovely, like it's connected to the story in that Lovely knows Jivan and is a key witness. But her story is more, it runs parallel, right? Like she's on her own, not coming of age, but like overcoming the odds, rags to riches story, which by itself would have been inspiring if it didn't come at the cost of Jivan's freedom, right?
Yeah. I have to say, I really loved Lovely's chapters because the way Megha wrote those chapters, it's very different from Jivan's and P.T. Sir's chapters. It's written in present progressive. So constantly Lovely is saying like, I am going to the park. I am doing this rather than like past tense or present tense. And it kind of gives you the sense like, okay, like this is someone who is struggling with English, but at the same time, they have like, they have like this magnificent voice. And I don't know, it seemed very lively and like a fresh breath of air to me when I was reading this book. And
did you feel like she was being scammed the entire time? Like it really felt like the acting school, the auditions that she was sent to, like I felt bad because like, oh, she's definitely getting taken advantage of by everybody around her.
I mean, it's Bollywood, right? Like that's her dream. And, she's someone who doesn't understand that like only even like straight cis women, if they have dark skin, they have no chance in Bollywood. So there's just like all these hurdles in front of her. And, she thinks that even though she's being scammed, like what else can she do? Like this is the only path in front of her. And really out of like the three of them, I think her dream was the most, had like the most grandeur. Because
it was the loftiest goal, yeah.
Yeah, Jivan's like, I just want to be able to pay my bills and take care of my parents. P.T. Sirs is just like,
I want to feel important.
I want to feel important and maybe make a little bit of money so that, I can have a little bit of a more impressive lifestyle. And then you have Lovely who's like, I want to be a Bollywood starlet. And it's like, what? Okay, that's like very delusional, but she makes it happen against all odds, which was surprising to me because I was like, I thought this was going to be, I thought P.T. Sir was the only one who was going to get his dream fulfilled. So that was a surprise.
Well, much like P.T. Sir, her dream comes at the cost of Jivan though, as well. And I think that was when, like, what did you think when the story turned, when she makes the conscious decision to like, yeah, I need to cut ties. I need to disavow my friendship with this woman who's already doomed, right? So the calculation that speaking the truth, speaking on the side of justice will do her no favors. And in fact, might actually destroy her dream of being in movies.
I think it was particularly sad because the reason why she got noticed in the first place was because she was so passionate at Jivan's hearing and was like, who are you to judge Jivan, who, is a teenage girl who is from a poor family but chooses to tutor someone like me in English? Like, what have you guys have done for yourself? Like, she's funny, she's charming, she's passionate, and that is what gets her, like, noticed. And, she kind of capitalizes on it because of timing and luck. And in the end, she has to turn her back away from Jivan, who is the one who kind of propelled her her fame. So it was like, oh, yeah, like that was a good arc, but it definitely does not sit well in your stomach at all.
Yeah, definitely one of those, like, I want to be happy for her. And it's nice that she has achieved a part of her dream, but like the fact that you have to like sell your soul in order to do it. And the fact that it doesn't really seem like for both PT Sir and Lovely, it weighs on them that much. It may weigh on them a little bit, but it's not like something they stay up all night thinking about, right? What they had to do to achieve this. To them, it's like, there's nothing we could do about it. This is just the way the world is. And if it's not me, like,
then someone else will take advantage.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah.
Which again is like an indictment on this idea of like social mobility as a political platform, but that social mobility being based on capitalism, and capitalism ending up turning everything into like a zero-sum game, right? Of winners and losers.
Yeah. And it's like, why are you guys fighting against each other? The real villain in the story is the corrupt government, okay? If you guys all band together and fight the government, then something will happen. But obviously people have, like people are just trying to live, and it's already hard enough.
Yeah, I mean, the book does a really good job of showing how, individuals have needs and wants and will act on those needs and wants, right? What will give them the most benefit? What will give them the most positive outcome? And it really explores the ways that like people in power, and especially demagogues, what they do to keep those people selfish, right? Keep them only focused on their own personal goals and desires, because it's much easier to control people when they're divided, and you can take advantage of that resentment. And that's, this book shows how people in power use that resentment to stay in power. And that's like, we ask ourselves, like, who is this book for? What is this book about? And the book is just about like, hey, this is how power works. Can we do anything about it? The book doesn't offer any solutions, right? Like, we end with PT Sir working in an office building, which was like, I guess in a sense, his dream, right? To work in the air-conditioned building. And it's like,
he's also working for the government too. He's like in the education ministry.
Yeah. As someone who like has like really no background in like actual education, like he was a PE teacher, right?
Like when he was at the rally and hearing not the rally, but like when he was going to rural villages and hearing everybody's complaints, like the teachers saying, we're not getting paid for our job, so why would we do our job? And then the parents complaining, say like, well, our kids are going to school and the teachers aren't even there. And these are all like legitimate complaints. And of course, like people just want to survive. Like teachers want to get paid. Parents want to make sure their kids are fed because the school promised like free lunches. And PT Sir is just like, this is my time to make a difference. Like I have my ear on the ground, and he tells the party like, hey, changing the syllabus in the textbooks, that's gonna do nothing. People do not fucking care about what you teach in those textbooks. Like they care about like getting fed, getting educated, getting paid on time. So I don't know, like it doesn't redeem him in my eyes, but I don't know, it just shows that not everyone is like a pure villain. Everybody has their selfish needs and their moralities, and I don't know, like the true villain in the story is capitalism and corrupt government. So, it's hard to just make it,
or like just how
villain.
Like late stage capitalism, how this idea of like social mobility being a zero sum game makes villains of us all, right?
Yeah. That's what I was trying to say. Thank you for being more eloquent than I.
Yeah, like PT Sir and Lovely, you can see them as the winners of this story, right? Because they're alive and they're living their dream, or like on their way to living their dreams. But it comes at a cost, and it came at like they both essentially have blood on their hands, right? It's like a you know how we say there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. Like, yeah, there's no way to exist in this system without trampling on someone else.
Yeah.
Like whether through like social, judicial, even like economic means. Like when you live under a system that's all about extracting the most amount of value for the least amount of cost, someone's going to be taken advantage of, someone's going to lose. And you end up with a system where there are winners and losers. And it's better to be a winner than a loser.
Oh, I have this quote that I pulled, and it like I was just like, yeah, this sums up my sentiments perfectly. The system doesn't always work for us, but you see that now and then you can make good things happen for yourself. And I thought, only now and then, I thought I would have a better life than that. And I'm like, abso-fucking-lutely. Like, a system that, like, now and then makes good things happen is not a good system. Okay?
Yeah, especially because if you pull back far enough, you'll see, like, the reason that it's now and then for you is because it's all the time for the people up top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also just, like, how ambition is different with each generation as well. And, you know, like, the system didn't work for the previous generation, like, such as, like, I don't know, like, if you're a woman, like, previous generations, they couldn't vote. They couldn't, like, apply for a credit card. They couldn't, like, move out of their own, they couldn't buy their own house without their husband or father's permission. And now the next generation is able to have these good things because the generation before suffered and really fought for it. So it's like...
Yeah, and then now we have a whole generation of people who want to bring us back to the good old days when men were in charge.
The good old days when the people in power had absolute power and the people who are marginalized and unprivileged had less rights.
I mean, yeah, another way we can map that to our own society also, like the dream of, like, the American dream for the boomers was to, like, have social mobility. Whereas, like, and essentially, like, the economic dreams of, like, millennials, Gen Z, and younger is like, hey, maybe if we work hard enough, we can get back to middle class, right? We can get back to where our parents were.
Yeah, yeah. And you see this with, what is it? There was, like, a character in, like, the portion where Jivan's in prison, and they think that, like, this rich, privileged person is going to come to their jail because they got arrested for speaking at a protest or whatever. I forgot what it was, but
It was a movie star. Yeah.
Oh, it was a movie star. Okay,
Yeah.
but it was like someone who is super privileged, right? And they're like, "Oh my God, she's going to be in the jail with us. We have to, like, clean up the jail and make sure that it's going to be a moment where both of us are equal. You know, we're both people." And then they find out that prison is different for rich people, that she gets to be imprisoned in the comforts of her home. And it's like, wow, what is that like? You know, her crime was far more serious than some of the people who are locked up in that squalor prison. And it's just like, well, that's just how the world works, I guess, in this corrupt system.
Yeah.
When did you realize that Jivan was going to die?
I feel like it was after the betrayal by the reporter. I mean, that's when it started to set in that, okay, maybe she's not going to make it through this. I mean, I feel like the PT Sir killing the Mercy petition was, like, confirmation of that. But I think halfway through, like, when we found out that, like, even the journalist was compromised, I think that's when I started to think, okay, this isn't a book about overcoming odds. Like, this isn't going to be that story. When did you piece it together?
Probably from, like, the very beginning, but, like, when I was 100% sure was, I think this is when she was talking to the reporter about how she ended up at the school, and she talks about how she, on her way to school, she would see a butcher, and she would see herself in the reflection of where, like, the skin goats were hanging from the hooks. And she was reflecting on how these goats are just like her. They came from places like her in, like, the rural outskirts, and they were led to the slums and eventually to the slaughterhouse. And she wonders if the goats knew the entire time. I'm not sure if I'm describing this correctly, but, like, I knew the moment she saw, like, the skin goats and she's talking about, like, about the butcher. I'm like, oh no, she's 100% going to be hung. And I don't know, I think I was in a very, like, cynical mood when I picked up this book. I apologize to our book club members. I read my books really late, right before our discussion, because I have terrible memory, and it just, like, it just helps with, like, remembering things. But Yeah, like I was in a really cynical mood when I was reading this because of the Marcellus Williams, death sentence. Like we couldn't save him, even though we had like all these signatures on the petition, and it was just like an illusion of hope, right? And also, like because this book takes place in Kolkata, earlier this year. Well, not even like earlier this year. It was only like a couple months ago. It was back in like August. There was a female doctor who was brutally raped and murdered at a hospital that she worked and was a student at, and she had absolutely no justice served. So I was like, yeah, these two things colliding into one. I was like, there's absolutely no way Jivan is going to be able to live. It's just, there is no justice in this world. That was kind of the mindset that I had when I was reading. So from the very beginning, I was just like...
Yeah, I mean, eventually you start to realize what a burning represents, right? The title of the book. It's not a burning of the systems. It's not like a burning,
it's not burning of the train.
Yeah, it's a burning of like this literal human kindling.
It's a sacrifice.
Yeah, the sacrifice of her life benefits everyone above her, and no one really cares about her as an individual because all she is a stepping stone for everyone else's success in this book. And it's a bummer to read, but it's a type of book that makes you think about how complicit you are in like these systems as well.
Yeah.
On that note, any last thoughts about A Burning?
I'm glad that I picked it for book club. I bought this book on a Kindle sale maybe 2 years ago, and I was like, I'm going to read this book at one point.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I picked it right when all these horrible things are happening in America and also in India, because it provided an interesting context.
Yeah, for sure. I was like, it's interesting that this book is also a read with Jenna Pick. So I'm kind of curious. I kind of want to go back and see what like mainstream America thought of this book. Kind of like a morbid curiosity of like what, yeah, exactly. Like what did the normies think about this book? And
what did the people in like the safe middle class majority who like does not experience discrimination in any level?
Do any of them realize that this book might be about us as well? Right?
Do they know that they are PT Sir? That we are all PT Sirs?
Yeah, I guess with that'll do it with our discussion of A Burning by Megha Majumdar. As always, if you have any thoughts about either our discussion or on the book itself, please let us know either on Discord or on Goodreads. It's always great to hear your feedback on our discussions. Before we go, October is Spooky Month, and our book club pick is our next Patron's Choice, which is a book club pick that our Honey Boba supporters on Patreon help us pick. So for the month of October, we are reading The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw.
So it is a novella. It is around 100 pages, so it is going to be a fast read. And it is, since it is like a creepy fairy tale with mermaids who eat flesh, I'm not sure if it classifies as like a lighter read, but it is definitely a spooky read. And it will definitely get us into the mood of Halloween. I am a big fan of fairy tale retellings. I don't know if this is a retelling, but I do love my grim fairy tales. So I am pretty keen on reading this.
Yeah.
So thank you to our Patreon members for recommending it.
Yeah, this one was recommended by our Patreon member, Kappa Jen. So thank you as always for your suggestions. As always, we will be reading along on Discord. I feel like the reading schedule will be a little bit more abridged this time around because it is a 100-page novella. So stay tuned for that post on Discord. And for those of you who have read the book already and have thoughts to give, let us know either on our Discord or on our Goodreads forums. As always, we love to include your thoughts on our discussion episodes whenever possible. But yeah, that'll do it for our discussion of our September book club pick, A Burning by Megha Majumdar. Thank you all for joining us. And once again, Rira, congratulations on 8 years of Books and Boba.
Yay!
All right. See y'all next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @booksandboba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey Brian, did you go to Saturday school as a kid?
I sure did. Did you?
Totally.
Well, at our podcast, Saturday School, we don't teach a language, but we pass along the culture that we do know.
And that's Asian American pop culture.
Ada's a journalist, and I'm a professor and film festival programmer.
We've watched a lot of great Asian American movies, and we want you to watch them too. Come listen to us as we look back at the pioneering films that have led us to today.